little is really known about the American Indian, or what links their human soul with the earth. The Indians believed that this land was created for them by the Great Spirit, and that it would be theirs forever. The New World, this is what the white man called our land, but it was not new at all. The red man, inhabitants of America for centuries.
Before watching this, it is very important that the other 4 anti-colonialism videos are seen first. The first one is Anti-Colonialism 2012, the second is Anti-Colonialism 2020, and the third is Anti-Colonialism and Solidarity, the fourth Anti-Colonialism and Anti-Fascism. I am Jason Unruhe, a Maoist rebel, political commentator and Third Worldist communist, bringing you Dennis Banks from the American Indian Movement.
The purpose of the convention is to bring about some kind of guidelines, some kind of platform, and certainly to establish an international treaty commission, a commission that would seek enforcement of all of the treaties that have been signed between the United States government and the Indian tribes of North America. And hopefully through the kinds of action that the American Indian Movement is proposing here at this convention, through the establishment of a treaty commission, that we'll be able to stop the illegal strip mining and the robbing of natural resources. In the past 15 months, we've seen examples of where Indian people are saying that is not so. And because there have been a non-enforcement of the treaties, this is what led to the assumption that the United States government could violate at their whim, violate any time that they wanted to, the articles of the treaties, the articles of contracts, the articles of agreements that have been established between Indian tribes and commissioners, agents, senators, congressmen, generals, colonels, but agents responsible to the United States government. In this country, ethnocide is taking place through an agency called the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where the BIA has assumed total responsibility to be our paternal parent, to be our landlord. But this country doesn't know how to be a landlord. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, has been charged with the responsibility of protecting our natural resources. They have, in fact, taken a position to join sides with Peabody Coal, Kennecott Copper, and mining interests in this country to deprive Indian people of valuable water rights, water that in some parts of this country is so polluted that nothing lives This treaty convention hopefully will close the door to the chapters of abuse and mistreatment. At least that's our intentions.
Dennis Banks was born on April 12, 1937. He died on October 29, 2017. He was a Native American activist, teacher, and author. He was a longtime leader of the American Indian movement, which he co-founded in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in 1968 to represent what can be referred to as the urban Indians. Dennis Banks was of the Ojibwe Nation. The American Indian Movement, or AIM, is still active, although less seen in today's corporatized media. Some say that it is a form of identity politics to support AIM, but this is an incorrect line. The truth is that it is class reductionist, not to support AIM.
I just want to get something off my mind, and something that frankly really needs to be said, and there's very few Marxists who are willing to step up and say something. This anti-white politics is bullshit. Okay, you've got so many people on the left going, just spouting anti-white rhetoric. Ha ha, spicy food. Oh, ha ha, white people are scared, this and that. Now, if you're a black radical, like a non-Marxist, like a regular black radical, even just a regular black person, okay, this would seem, the kind of thing that you would do. And that's fine, if that's your position. However, if you're a Marxist, this really isn't the right position to be taking. It doesn't take much to notice how this anti-white politics, and that I mean the really, it's not even like a real politics, it's just sort of this thing that leftists do. They engage in name-calling against white people as if somehow that's supposed to be an argument for something. And yes, I realize the response will be given to this video is, you're white, you're triggered, etc. Of course, the problem here is that in terms of Marxist theory, this doesn't make any sense. I know a lot of people will instantly scream class reductionism, as if Marx didn't write a theory about class and class struggle. Now, the history of why you have to work with class to eliminate other forms of oppression are already known. It's already there in Marx's writings, so I don't have to rehash it here. The problem is that everybody's just sort of pretending that it doesn't exist or not following it. For example, there was one Facebook post I saw where somebody was saying, oh, how Marx wrote on race. Well, actually he didn't. That wasn't one of the subjects that Marx covered in depth. He did applaud the end of slavery, but he also turned around and supported the U.S. annexation of New Mexico.
That was me on the date of August 19th, 2018. And this is me on the date of August 25th, 2018.
I want to continue the video that I did the other day on saying that anti-white politics is reactionary, and I still stand by that position. Now, many people seem to be willing to agree with the statement that if you say, kill whitey, white people will reject your politics. I mean, that's just common sense. If you threaten to kill the group, that group will not want to follow you. Now, of course, being the dishonest pile of garbage that identity pollers are, what they did was assume that I was like dog whistling or trying to think of any criticism of white people as what he's talking about. No, I'm talking about knowing the difference between being anti-white and anti-racist. There's actually a very clear distinction. Saying you're going to kill all white people is anti-white. Saying that you want to combat racism among the white community is anti-racism. Now, I don't think it's really all that hard to understand that. That's pretty simple, and someone of even a moderate intelligence should be able to understand that. Yet the knee-jerk ID poll reaction by many people, and this was primarily on Twitter, not so much on YouTube. On YouTube it was very minimal, but on Twitter it was amazing. My one tweet saying that threatening to kill white people will not get white people to join your cause got hundreds of likes and an astronomical load of responses. I have never gotten that much attention for one single tweet in my entire life. Not even the announcement that I was going to debate Sargon of Akkad got that much. It's really a polarizing issue. You either don't want to declare your intention to kill people for the color of their skin, or you're a racist piece of shit. Like, there just can't be anything in between. I mean, it boggles my mind that people can't understand this. I mean, aside from just screaming racist at me, which is what everyone did, not one person, not in all the tweets that were sent back, not one contained a rational argument. Like 99% of them were all just calling me racist. Oh, maybe this guy thinks racism doesn't exist. No, I never said that. I never implied that either. All I said was that threatening to kill white people won't win the white working class over to you. And even some people said, didn't you read Settlers? There is no white working class. I'm like, okay, that's true. Isn't it amazing how you'll attack first worldism saying, there's the working class in the first world too, including white people. Most of the population in the U.S. is working class. That being, white people are 60% of the population, so you would be saying that a good majority of the working class would be white, but then turn around and say, well, or read Sakai. Well, I mean, of course, this is the same double thing that's always used against third worldism. Attack third worldism on one basis and then use the exact opposite to attack it on another, providing no ideological consistency whatsoever. That's okay. I'm used to that kind of dishonesty. But it's really strange. It's a very simple concept. Do you or do you not believe in the following statement? If you threaten to kill white people will follow you. I mean, it's very, very simple. We are not talking about, you're not allowed to criticize white supremacy. I suggested no such thing. I very clearly did not, and I very clearly said racism exists. The fact that you have to go to such depths of dishonesty shows how bad your position is. You know you're wrong. Do you believe that statement is correct or not? It's pretty simple. I don't understand why first worldists can't seem to understand that. Because third worldists seem to understand exactly what I'm saying without any difficulty, and we choose the global proletariat over the first world, so-called proletariat, the vast majority of the third world proletariat being people of color to begin with.
The reason why I'm showing you this is because it has become clear to me that I must clear up some confusion that I have let spiral out of control for too long. I have always been against whiteness. The simple truth is I lacked the language necessary to explain my opposition to whiteness. There is no white nation. Reactionary Europeans forcibly invented whiteness as a justification for colonialism. I even used the language of anti-white politics until I saw that all it did was encourage racism towards Europeans. If you think that I am making this up, let me show you what I said on the 23rd of April, 2012.
So, the fallout from the pro-gun video I did was pretty interesting. A lot of closet liberals got outed that day. A bunch of people running around calling themselves Marxists when they don't believe in guns, which makes me question the whole history of revolution against the ruling class. Apparently they'd like to ask them to stop, because that's what Lenin did, right? That's what Stalin did, that's what Mao did. That's what Castro did, was just ask them to stop. And one person saying, all Western European parties oppose guns. They oppose the ownership of guns. And they have the gall to call themselves communists. They sound like a bunch of social democrats. Or maybe that's just, what do you call it, an Anglo-Saxon disease. Maybe that's just something the Europeans, they don't like fighting. Because the Russians didn't seem to mind. They kind of really wanted to. And that really makes me question how much freedom the Western European communist parties really believe in, if they're going to take guns away from people.
I go further on to say,
come on! Come on, you sound like a bunch of liberals here.
I know Mao said combat liberalism, and a lot of you out there don't like Mao. They prefer the traditional, nice, safe, white Marxism and Leninism. But I mean, come on. Stalin didn't stand there advocating peace. It's called class warfare for a reason. God, you just don't get it.
This is a piece of a video I did on September 18th, 2014.
Also, do you think each race should have their own homeland, where they can practice their own culture, religion, etc.? I believe in giving autonomy to oppressed groups. Not every race has their own country. I believe in self-determination for oppressed peoples. And by the way, you should interpret that as an anti-white position.
Now, I have the correct language for this whiteness is colonial settler culture. Blackness is manifestation of a new nationality of liberation struggle. The black nation was conceived of in the slave ships when Africans were stolen by European Christians. There is a word that has been used by a lot of anarchists. This word is reciprocity. Reciprocity is a social norm of responding to a positive action with another positive action, rewarding kind actions. As a social construct, reciprocity means that in response to friendly actions, people are frequently much nicer and more cooperative than predicted by the self-interest model. Conversely, in response to hostile actions, they are frequently much more nasty and even brutal. Reciprocity is considered to be essential in the Bundist movement. In Arizona, many Marxists adopt forward notions of dialectical reciprocity. However, in all honesty, the concept of the dialectical reciprocity came from the organization that Comrade 3 is a part of. Now, Comrade number 3 is a part of the Navajo Nation. My conversation with him was very important to me. I want to say to Comrade number 3, thank you for showing me dialectical reciprocity. It will be dialectical reciprocity that allows Marxists and anarchists to be able to formulate arguments that don't cause bitter feelings or throwing insults. In October 2019, Mexi made a video called On Strategies for Post-Capitalism. The video caused quite a bit of controversy, so she made a follow-up video that I have not seen. Now, in the video, Mexi says a lot of demasculinizing words. This has been an issue with mainstream feminism for a long time now, that predominantly being liberal feminism. Now, I need to say, I think BreadTube is a problem. And I think it's an echo chamber of questionable anarchists. Left unity is not going to work. We need tactical, anti-sectarian left alliances based around a unity, struggle, unity. United with them on what we agree with, struggle with them on what we disagree with, and then unite around the common issues. One of the other bigger issues with BreadTube is how it can become such an important outreacher and then just disappear when convenient. Bad Mouse Productions was the first YouTube channel to show us the unique and all often ignored struggles of Christians of the Orient. That video is now unpublished or deleted. I don't know what happened to it. Bad Mouse, I don't think he should have removed that video. What Bad Mouse did was important. It was one of the most underrepresented groups on the left, and its removal had negative effects. Now, I do not want Bad Mouse to be harassed, and all I am saying is that he shouldn't have done this, because it was an important video. ContraPoints is another interesting example. I do not hate ContraPoints. I just think that ContraPoints could do so much better and do better things. Like maybe reach out to lumpen trans people that so often get targeted for violence. And I happen to disagree with ContraPoints when she says her past videos were bad. I don't think they're bad. Her past videos are actually very good. BreadTube does not help. And the better bread tubers don't have the connection with Marxist-Leninists that they should. The anarchist grouping on BreadTube isolate the genuine anarchists that don't typically have the money to build their channels. The ones that I've been showing a lot of respect to and solidarity with recently. Now I'm going to play a piece from Mixie's video. This part I mostly agree with. You will see what she talks about here is exactly my point on the subject of Indigenous struggles that we have to take seriously.
So basically, bring in reciprocity and ecological consciousness into our discourse, bring in more feminism, or at least make sure that we don't fall prey to like masculinist, patriarchal visions of social change. And lastly, bring in decolonization into our strategy. This is something that I've taken a lot of flack for on the left, which has been frustrating, honestly. And I think it just underscores why I felt the need to make this video. I feel strongly that the idea of a settler revolution on Indigenous land without Indigenous leadership is colonial. And frankly, I've asked some comrades in various organizations in Toronto what they thought about this issue, and I was pretty disappointed with a lot of their responses. A lot of them were just like, oh, well, you know, we'll do our communist thing at the state level, and then they can just have areas, whatever areas they want, right? I was just like, oh, that sounds like reserves. Sounds like the reserve system, just a socialist reserve system. Doesn't sound that great. And then some people, a lot of leftists were actually saying, you know, well, what are you even talking about? They're only 5% of the population, so it would be undemocratic to have Indigenous nations leading anything because there's so few of them here. Well, yeah, they're 5% of the population because we committed a devastating and ongoing genocide that continues to this day. So you're just basically apologizing for colonialism and saying, well, we're here now, so we make the rules because we have the majority. That's a yikes from me. And what does decolonization mean? Does it mean that settlers need to all go back where they came from?
How about no?
And obviously I'm not Indigenous, so don't take my word for it. Please, I've listed a lot of resources in the description box below, or, you know, build relationships with the Indigenous nations in which you inhabit and ask them how they feel about decolonization and what that would look like in their territory. But generally, I mean, whenever I talk to my Indigenous colleagues about this, they say, no, it's not about people going back from where they came from. It's that settlers need to learn to live in the nations that they inhabit. They need to learn to follow natural law. They need to follow the constitutions of the places that they actually inhabit. I mean, the treaties themselves were sharing treaties. Indigenous people actually initially welcomed Europeans and said, yes, we will share this with you. It wasn't, yes, I'll sign here and you can have control of all of the land, and as long as I can live on this small reserve. No, that wasn't it at all. It wasn't even that, you know, we own the land. It was, no, we don't own the land. None of us own the land. We are in relationship with this land and with all of creation, and we will share this with you as long as you uphold your responsibilities to the land and live in reciprocity, etc. And then we done fucked it up. And again, we don't have the knowledge. We don't know how to be Indigenous to place. We have our Western mindsets of humans here, nature there, resource production. Nature is resource. Nature is just the input into our system, into our labor system, and we transform nature into whatever we need. That's our mindset. We don't know how to live in reciprocity with the ecosystems around us. And so I think that honestly, any movement that isn't centering building relationships with Indigenous nations, local Indigenous nations, and elevating their leadership and asking what is it that we can do to support your sovereignty, to support decolonization. What would it look like? What would it look like to share this land in a sustainable, reciprocal, nurturing, responsible way? We have fallen way down on our responsibilities to the land and to each other. And I think that part of this does come from our disconnected Western worldview. Anyway, I'm going to be doing a podcast upcoming with a comrade of mine who is part of the Indigenous Anarchist Federation about this idea of decolonizing revolution and what our strategies can look like if we're taking decolonization seriously, so stay tuned for that. And otherwise, I mean, I can just keep talking, but I feel like I've been talking for a while, and those are my thoughts. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be very angry to hear a lot of these thoughts, and I hope that that's not the case. I hope that you can just take it for what it is and understand that what I'm pleading for is just some humility, compassion, and some critical thought about the here and now and how we're going to move forward together realistically.
January 18th, 2005. An anonymous message was sent throughout the United States and Canada titled Maoist Street Code. Maoism in the first world is not Maoism in the third world. The only way to hold high the great red banner of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism in the first world is to build up the first world lumpen proletariat. The labor aristocracy is the enemy of the revolution. It is the first world lumpen proletariat that must be revolutionized, recognizing that the base of revolution can only be found in the third world. The first world working class is ruled by the labor aristocracy, which connects itself to the middle class. The first world working class is usually labor aristocracy. Even when the first world working class is separate from the labor aristocracy, there is no lasting proletariat. The original Black Panther Party, as they were in the 1960s and the 1970s, is the first prototype to Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. With the study of the original Black Panther Party, correct analysis can be comprehended and advanced. Mao Zedong thought is not Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. Mao Zedong thought was the Marxism, Leninism of China during the time of Mao Zedong. The original Black Panther Party, as they were in the 1960s and the 1970s, applied Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought to their own condition, suffering under the brutality of the police. The Black Panthers took advantage of the contradictions in the capitalist republic, more commonly known as the United States of America. What the Black Panthers did was legal deterrence. Marxism, Leninism, Maoism emerged as a new revolutionary path to be upheld by the revolutionary internationalist movement, and the evidence was the shining path led by Manuel Rubel Abimel Guzman Reynoso. The revolutionary international movement was destroyed by Guzman and had become reactionary. This does not stop Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. People's war in the third world and legal deterrence in the first world. The third world must carry out people's war. This is evident. Advancements in people's war in both theory and practice can only be discovered by the third world Maoists. What the first world Maoists have to maintain is legal deterrence. This legal deterrence can only be done by establishing a common law for revolutionaries in the first world. Maoist common law, street code, and international stance. Marxism, Leninism, Maoism can only be grasped by understanding the fundamentals of the enemy. The enemy of the proletariat is the enemy of all revolutionaries. The Patriot Act signed by President George W. Bush is a contingency plan to put down revolution, a furthering continuation of COINTELPRO. Maoists in the first world, well versed in the correct line of revolutionary science for our time, requires that we know what determines revolution in the first world is the lumpen proletariat. The first world lumpen proletariat lost class consciousness due to the effects of counterintelligence program. We must reawaken the lumpen proletariat to class struggle. This is easier said than done. The obligation of the first world revolutionary is the obligation to sabotage the bourgeois first world. The first world revolutionary has another obligation, an obligation to the proletarian third world. Maoist common street law dictates, as it must, an infringement against the anarchists is an infringement against the Maoists. Maoist common law street law dictates that, as it must, an infringement against the Marxist, Leninist, Maoists is an infringement on anarchists. We must unite with the anarchists on what we agree with. We struggle with the anarchists on what we disagree with. Marxism-Leninism is outdated. However, Marxist-Leninists hold relevance in the post-Soviet Eastern Bloc. Many infringements on our confused Marxist-Leninist comrades is an infringement on the Marxist-Leninist Maoists. Attacks and infringements on Maoists damage the work of Leninists and thus cannot be tolerated. We must struggle against narcotics flooding the urban streets of the First World. We must struggle against racism because it destroys class struggle. We must protect anarchists when they are under the attack of fascists. We must protect the poor because we can never win them over if we show apathy. Yet, we must never give in to counter-revolutionary appeals to emotion. Serve the people, combat liberalism, defend correct ideas, reject incorrect ideas. Marxism, Leninism, Maoism is the highest stage of Marxism, and this Maoist street code is the constitution of Maoism in the First World. It is correct to rebel against reactionaries. It is correct to show solidarity for anarchists when they need it. It is our obligation to struggle with anarchists when we see incorrect views propagated by them. It is even correct and necessary to see the best anarchists as comrades. We must establish rebel journalism with a serious stance against imperialism, colonialism, and fascism. We must develop self-reliance, self-defense programs. We must form rebelling cooperatives that do not exploit the Third World. We must create eco-friendly plans to ensure the survival of the planet, or we will all perish. We must lift up Native Americans and help them in their struggle against colonialism. The Native Americans hold the key to saving the environment. We must stand with radicals who combat fascism. It is counter-revolutionary to ignore dangerous, incoherent fascist reactionaries and their political movements. We must build Antifa cells with anarchists, or we may all very well wake up in prison camps. We beat the fascists before. We can beat them again. The Maoist Street Code is the foundation to building the necessary united front against the enemies of revolution.
The white genocide of the First Nations was in its final phase. Only 5% of the First Nation populations remained. For the whites, this was 5% too many. A few remnants to tell the story and maybe cause trouble was not tolerable. And this 5% still had a bit of land. The final solution was simple. No new generations. So now, they came for the children. This is the place where they brought the children. To this place. And many like it. By force. By kidnapping. By the thousands. As captives. As inmates. As hostages. And for execution. The whites called it killing the Indian. Killing their bond with their nations. Killing their spirit of resistance. And killing them outright. The minimum program. Slaughter of First Nation identity. Not in secret, but celebrated oppressor nation policy. Tear the children from their people. Then commence the massacre. in its totality. The whites called it killing the Indian. And they meant it. Annihilate the children, ideologically and psychologically. Eviscerate them physically, up to and including death. Barbaric, national oppression. Always the Americans' great white way to empire. The final solution for that empire is in the making.
Shubal Morgan was the true heart and soul of the collective realization for Maoism Third Worldism. Now, ever since the unofficial titling of Maoism Third Worldism has become recognized and solidified, I've decided to explain something. The full term for Maoism Third Worldism is Marxism-Leninism Maoism Third Worldism. The term Marxism-Leninism Maoism Third Worldism is way too long-winded. It's much easier to say Maoism Third Worldism. The presentation you just saw was from Shubal Morgan. Several people don't like to read blog posts because they're not fancy websites with a domain name. But even the leading light communist organization started as a blog site. My domain name website started as a WordPress blog. Now I own my own domain website, but I started very small. Even the press must start as grassroots. We need to build up resistance journalism in the first world. I want to offer up the Maoist street code as a way to conduct resistance in the first world, something both Maoists, Third Worldists, and the organization of Comrade Number 3 can use. Both MLMs and M3Ws are required to take in non-Marxist ideas if those ideas are found to be correct, and incorporate those incorrect ideas into our analysis. If an idea is correct, we adopt it. If an idea is incorrect, we reject it. Marxism is the science of revolution, not dogma. Maxwell Glover, I want to thank you for questions. It is good to see that they were well put and not insulting. Talking about the goings-on in Arizona is rather difficult. I already did a report on the human trafficking in Arizona with very good sources, and not many people looked at the sources. There is a major correspondence between the repression of Bundists and the activities in Arizona. In the previous video, Anti-Colonialism, Anti-Fascism, you see Dr. Weisfeld denouncing the Zionists in the West Bank. He actually managed to make them leave. This is what the Bundist movement offers us. and we aid Zionism when we hold back Jews. That wish to express their opposition to Zionism. Has Gilead Atzmon, Rich Siegel, done anything for Palestine? No, nothing. For decades, Bundism has been repressed by Zionists and the majority of Marxists even. It is the wrong mindset to demand proof about the facts of Arizona that I have mentioned. The correct mindset is to acknowledge the testimonies of the various groups and individuals in Arizona. When the Bundist movement seeks to show the difference between the Jewish nation and the Zionists, this is not intersectionalism or identity politics. When the Mexica movement proclaims the truth that the indigenous Mexicans are not Latino or Hispanic, this is not intersectionalism or identity politics. The Mexica movement is not Marxist. So what? They hold a more historical material information concerning the Central American natives than any other group. Ironically, a detractor of the native rival of the Mexica movement is well versed on the human trafficking problems on the west coast of the USA. A channel on YouTube, Obsidian Rising. You will find that most who support the channel are very aware of the human trafficking that takes place in Arizona and how this ties into the human and drug trafficking in the state of Arizona. On the matter of feminism, it is time for us Marxists to change the historical revisionist idea that patriarchy has ruled every single civilization on the planet. Patriarchal societies and egalitarian societies have both existed throughout history. To assume that feminism is universally applicable is identity politics. As for China and Cuba, in these places I agree with feminism. I have never said otherwise. I said I support feminism for Europeans like myself. In fact, one of my biggest problems with China today is the lack of feminism that there used to be when headed by Mao of the Communist Party. There's a lot of historical material evidence that native societies were egalitarian. Our rejection of this is largely what has completely turned off the majority of indigenous Mexicans to Marxism. It is in fact the women among the indigenous Mexican activists who object to feminism the most. Refusing to cooperate with the Bundist movement is class reductionist. Not considering the statements made by indigenous Mexican activists is class reductionist. Turning off the Muslim world to Marxism is class reductionist. We must combat both incorrect ideas. Both intersectionalism and class reductionism have no place in Marxism. The first world lumpen proletariat has the most revolutionary potential in the first world. If you seek vindication for me saying this, please check out a video by the Black Internationalist called War in the Cities, a Maoist perspective on first world lumpen. Both Marxist-Leninist Maoists and Maoist Third Worldists would consider the first world lumpen to have the most revolutionary potential in the first world. Both MLMs and M3Ws would consider the first world lumpen to be neutralized to a very large extent. The difference being, Maoists hold the idea that they can wake up the first world lumpen. Third Worldists hold the idea that we should support the few revolutionary first world lumpen, but that the majority of them will never awaken. Did you know that the Palestinian nation is a lumpenized nation? Palestinians are some of the most revolutionary people on the planet. Karl Marx was completely incorrect on the subject of the lumpen, just as he had been on the bigoted Jewish question.
Well, the whole situation in Bergeson has now had a couple of days to sink into everyone, meaning everybody has a chance to better grasp what's going on now that the initial anger, the initial reaction is gone. Now what's left is less of an emotion-fueled reaction and more, hopefully, an attempt to look at things from an analytical perspective. Unfortunately, the media has completely and utterly failed to do that. The one thing that strikes me the most is the anger towards people looting. I understand that they're angry, but there's no need for the looting. Or, as the usual white liberal stance of, you don't need to loot. I mean, it's just not necessary. Focus your anger on where it should be. And I say, where is that? Where is it supposed to be? They say, stop being angry. Start showing peace. Be like Martin Luther King. It's especially hilarious when white people try to invoke the image of Martin Luther King and his stoic self-control and his passion where he wasn't violent right before they shot him in the face. It never ceases to amaze me how white liberals can continually advocate, just relax, calm down, think this through. The system will work. And that is essentially what anyone who is saying, don't riot, don't loot. That's exactly what they're saying. They're saying the system works, that there's a peaceful resolution to this, that there's something in the system that they can go through that would actually work. But that system that they very well know doesn't work, that already has to be changed, because they're already arguing that it needs to be changed. But then they're turning around and saying, don't riot, do that. That's usually the white people way of saying, well, don't actually risk the society. I mean, it's very easy to say, don't use violence, don't loot, when, well, you're not the one getting shot at. So it's very easy to stand here and advocate the non-violence when, well, you're not the one getting killed by police. But if you're already recognizing that the legal system doesn't work, which it clearly just demonstrated that it doesn't, why would you then turn around and rely on that same legal system? That doesn't make any sense. And at times like these, when people rise up and they cause destruction like this, they destroy things, regardless of what it is that they're destroying. And then people come out and they complain about this. I'm reminded of the old expression by Mao. The emperor can burn down villages, but the people are forbidden from lighting even a single candle. And isn't that exactly what we've seen? We've seen police officer after police officer kill hundreds of, if we consider the entire time, thousands of young black men, and nothing happens. Rarely anything even happens. But if the people in Ferguson riot, they just destroy stuff, or they injure a couple of cops, then that's too far. That's wrong. It's going too far. Oh, once again, the police are allowed to kill all these people and have nothing happen to it, nothing challenges the system, and no difference is made. The emperor is burning down villages. But the people uprise once, smash a couple of things, don't even kill anybody, and they're not even allowed to light that one single candle. And that's very much the anti-revolutionary mentality. It's also the very racist mentality as well. But I'm going to get into that in a minute.
That was me back in 2014. The things that I am talking about in that video seem to ring true more than ever. The legal system does not work at all. One of the most guilty people who are calming down the so-called uppity is Cornel West. Cornel West is attempting to herd the black vote and the Jewish vote into voting for Sanders instead of rebelling, which is the only true answer in the rising fascist state. I would not be surprised if Cornel was even seeking to herd the Jewish black vote to Bernie Sanders. Never mind that Cornel West is a liar that championed Barack Obama, a liberal in the White House, the white man's White House. And now he is backing a centrist court social democrat that can never speak for the needs of the Jewish nation, which stands in opposition to the Zionist state of Israel. Now, this does not mean I have no sympathy for the way Sanders has been treated by the mainstream Democratic Party, but sympathy is not endorsement. It never seems to occur to the white population that the white man's campaign for Barack Obama was nothing more than virtue signaling. In fairness to Bernie Sanders, his campaign is more of a way to tap into a sort of anti-fascist campaign, yet this too is built more on virtue signaling. The white SJW movement is a movement of whites virtue signaling to each other how much they oppose bigotry. This is a way of clearing up the collective white guilt. Now, I turn you over to Jamil Abdul-Alamin, formerly known as H. Rap Brown.
Well, politics as defined by the geographical and influential spheres of this country is irrelevant to black people and is irrelevant to the masses of people. The vote has been used as a tool of oppression against black people. I mean, Camus raises a very good point when he says, what better way to enslave a man than give him the vote and call him free? See, it does not profit black people or poor people anything to have the vote and not be able to select the candidates who they want to choose. Now, how can you choose between Lyndon Johnson, Nixon, Agnew, Wallace, and Humphrey? There is no choice. Evil is evil. There's nothing in between that.
There was some lesser candidates. Dick Gregory was running for office. Eldridge Cleaver.
I think the vote can only be used as a tool of organization. We can only use the vote to organize our people. Now, to really believe that we can put someone in office and that these people would be responsive to our needs is naive, politically naive. Because even if one of the black candidates who ran for office was to take the office of president, then black people must be prepared to fight against that person.
Why?
Because, you see, the system mandates the action of the individual. The individual does not determine how this country will function. This country works off the military-industrial complex, which means that it's profitable to wage war. And unless you, devise another plan, another scheme to sustain, to boost this economy, then it's going to be necessary to wage war, whether, a black individual is in office or a white individual is in office. Well, so we're talking about a complete a change in system.
If Mr. Cleaver did win the election, don't you think that he could have conducted the presidency in a unique manner that may not be, compromising to the system you speak of?
No, because, as I said, the system dictates the response of individuals. See, individuals do not influence, politically, economically, or socially.
I see.
The attitudes or functioning of the system.
Well, if politics as we know it here in this country is not the answer, what is?
I think there has to be a reevaluation of politics. Now, there are definitions of politics that are relevant to black people. Chairman Mao says that politics is war without bloodshed, and war is an extension of politics. I think black people have to begin to address themselves to the politics of revolution, because we are caught up in revolutionary struggle, whether we want to believe it or whether we want to be or not. So I think, black people have to begin to think in a revolutionary fashion and create and construct a politically revolutionary platform.
Is this going to be a race revolution, or is it going to be a class revolution?
I think, like in terms of struggle and who will comprise the revolutionary front of that struggle, it will be oppressed people. See, black people are in the vanguard position of the struggle because we've been the most dispossessed. However, there are other oppressed people in this country: Mexican American, the Spanish American community, the Puerto Ricans, the American Indian, Japanese Americans, and even poor whites. But racism, I don't believe that racism will allow poor whites to form alliances with the revolutionary groups in this country.
The United States of America cannot be changed as a country. Only a full abolishment of the United States of America is acceptable. Jamil Abdullah Al-Min is correct in the struggle, and the revolutionary front will be composed of oppressed people. It is only from the bottom up that revolutionary socialism occurs, never from top down. This is also why, for all of you that are so sure the revolution in the First World will come, even though it is not historically, you must realize that the First World revolutionary class is lumpen. White fear and First World fear. It is true that many of those considering themselves to be white fear that non-whites will be seeking justice, making them pay. The same is true of First Worlders. Many First Worlders fear that Third Worlders will seek justice, making them pay. So I'm going to now direct you to a video I did on July 25th, 2015.
I had a very interesting conversation with someone who was dumb. Apparently this person believed that they could not be racist because they were a person of color. Now bear with me. Racism is when someone who structurally has power over someone who structurally doesn't have power, which is why when you're white, nobody really can be racist against you. And that would be true. But this power structure that I'm referring to occurs on a global scale as well. There are parts of the world that have power over parts of the world that don't have power. Usually we refer to them as the first and the third world, or the imperialist occupier and the victim of imperialism.
The very best example of what I'm referring to of how, regardless of color, anyone who enlists in the U.S. military is racist. Those who fight for Britain and Canada fight for the cause of racism. But those who fight for the United States of America are more than merely racist. Those that fight, or even do desk work for the United States military, are partakers of the global genocide.
Now allow me to give you a good example of how a person of color can be racist. Now, do you remember when Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11, was allied with Iraq and had weapons of mass destruction, even though there was literally no evidence to indicate any of this was actually true? And we were supposed to invade Iraq, invade all the Muslim countries, and that was the thing people were screaming, you know, we got to destroy the Arab world, or destroy the Muslim world. They're all like that. They all hate us because of our freedoms. Now, that's racist. And if you're black and you do it, you're still racist. If you're yellow or you're red, you're still racist if you participate in that. Because that is still a structural racism that comes from the first world to the third world. If you're a person of color and you do that, yes, you are still racist.
Enter first worldism. Enter first world privilege.
That was basically the conversation that I had with the person. Yes, people of color in the first world who still enforce, white-based racism against other countries, ones that are not in the economic position, you are still being racist by supporting that oppression. But this person believed that it couldn't happen. Why? Because they were a person of color. This is the problem with identity politics. They do not fight oppression, they fetishize it. Yes, even if you're a person of color in the first world and you engage in the racist activity against a third world country, you are still racist. If you are a black person and you spread all the horrible false stereotypes about people who live in Africa with the justification of maintaining a superiority over them, particularly when it's economic, political, in the context of imperialism, you are still racist. That is what this person could not understand. And this is the problem with first worldism. This is the problem we face. They only want to point out racism that makes them out to be a victim. They don't want to point out the things that they are doing. This is another perfect example of first worldism. I feel as though I'm oppressed in the first world, therefore I can't possibly be engaging in something that causes oppression. This is a denial of personal responsibility. This is a denial of the oppression that occurs between the first and the third world. Believe it or not, just as all white people aren't necessarily racist, there is still a white supremacist-based system which all white people are responsible for. This occurs in imperialism as well. Just because you're not the actual imperialist soldier that goes over to a country and murders people, you are still structurally a part of a system of imperialism. And this is something first worldists like to relieve of themselves. They like to pretend they're not responsible or even really a part of that system because they don't like imperialism. And yet, what I say rings true when you look at the fact that they never actually do anything to fight imperialism of any substance. Do you ever notice how a lot of this has the really white colonizer mentality to it? We take the example that I'm sure we've all seen on Facebook countless times of when white people have rioted because a sports team won and they've done untold damage. And those guys are just clowning around, or they're just excited, they're just jubilant. They're just clowns, ruffians. But when black people riot over a legitimate, massive, ongoing injustice, they're thugs, they're demons, they're these awful, scary hordes of black people. Do you ever notice that? And it's not just limited to this concept of just white and black. This happens on an international scale as well. This is a global and also imperialist type mindset. Look at the people. Look at the United States invade Iraq and Afghanistan. These two countries which are not responsible for the things that they claim that they're responsible for, particularly with regards to Iraq. Then after the professional army of Iraq runs away, or is defeated, people step in and take their place. and they IED bomb the United States. And they rocket attacks and whatnot. And they're just terrorists. Because nobody could legitimately not want the U.S. Army occupying their country. I mean, that's an entirely foreign concept to them. They literally cannot get it through their heads that people don't want to be occupied by the U.S. military.
Do you feel that black people will ever have a strong political voice in this country in the formal sense as we understand it? You mentioned that you don't think that this could ever come about. Is there any chance that it might?
No, see, I think that's a reformist, position to assume for me to say that black people will one day occupy in this system political offices of importance. Now, this brings on a whole discussion of control, you see, and how you control. Because anything that you don't control is used as a weapon against you. Now, in terms of black people occupying positions, America has created in Cleveland, Washington, D.C., and Gary, Indiana, a type of neo-colonialism. In other words, the man has set up a puppet regime. These black people are responsive to the needs and the whims of the Democratic Party and not of the masses of black people. If Johnson is president or whoever is president was to tell Stokes or Hatcher or Walter Washington to send black people to concentration camps, then there would be no discussion, because they would see it as their job, because they hold a position that's, responsive or that's sensitive to the Democratic Party.
Do you view those that are in prominent positions that are black sort of a token gesture on the part of the establishment, like a member of the Supreme Court bench that was a black member of the cabinet, and so forth?
I think that has to be examined in the sense of progress and as to whether black people have made progress in this country. My contention is that black people have not made progress in this country. America has given blacks some concessions out of political necessity, bad political necessity. They gave Thurgood Marshall a position on the Supreme Court to appease black people. In other words, we didn't put Thurgood Marshall there. They can take Thurgood Marshall whenever they get ready. We put Adam in office. They took Adam out. They gave black people an astronaut, and they killed him. So what happens is that has to be viewed in the light of concessions. The very fact that the man can concede a position to you tells you that you do not have a position of power where you can demand, or that you can mandate something.
How do you think that the press has affected the black situation in this country?
I think news media and media in general are very negative in terms of any revolutionary movement or any movement that, forces the change of the status quo. Now, media has always been an enemy of black people, because what media has done is media has always singled out people who had vanguard positions or vanguard attitudes and tried to make these people an enemy of the masses of people. In our case, make individuals enemies of black people. Malcolm X would be a good example. More Negroes feared Malcolm X than white people, because news media told black people that Malcolm was bad. Muhammad Ali, the reason that Muhammad Ali could be given the maximum sentence and the maximum fine and the black community did not revolt was because Muhammad Ali had been made an enemy of black people. Adam Clayton Powell could be legally lynched, politically lynched, and black people did not revolt. It was because the man had told black people that Adam Clayton Powell was an uppity nigger. He had legitimatized his own action through news media. So the news media is a tool of oppression.
What about your personal experience with the press? Do you feel that the press has given you a fair shake?
You see, in terms of myself as an individual, whether I get coverage or not, doesn't make any difference. But in terms of ideas, in terms of the flux of ideas, or the flow of ideas,
right, your
I see that, I see that the press has deliberately created a vacuum in terms of deliverance of attitudes or positions to the black community, which is to be expected. We cannot rely upon white news media to convey black revolutionary messages. So, the press is doing their job. And to me, what happened to me last year with the press was that there was a boycott against me. ABC, NBC, and CBS. Anything that Rap Brown did, you blacked out. Because, just like that, no question about it. And this was the whole attitude that has been assumed by news media. And black people do not control news media, so they cannot expect to turn on TV and find out what's going on in the black community. Just like, for example, in New York Times, one of the biggest pieces of white nationalism that exists in the country.
You have been quoted in the media, and you have been given some exposure. I think what you're saying is that the quality of that exposure leaves something to be desired. Or do you feel that you were totally excluded?
It's not an exclusion of individuals. It's an exclusion of positions, of vanguard positions, which again, I say, news media being what it is and serving who it serves is to be expected of news media. I think, black people, the total community of black people are for revolutionary change.
Okay, so that's roughly 11%.
And any group, any oppressed group, who wants to better their situation, out of necessity has to be for revolutionary change, because the system is incapable of changing itself. So by the very fact that it is incapable of changing, it says that you're for revolutionary change.
I see. It follows then that it will not be, there's no way of forecasting when it's going to come about. It's sort of a pressure that is building constantly.
See, as I said, I think revolution is an evolutionary process. I think as repression increases, people must respond to that repression. Now, the dilemma that the black movement is in today is that, there's a divisiveness that exists in the black community between what's considered cultural nationalists and political nationalists. Now, understand, the man or system endorses cultural nationalism. He will give people money to open up dashiki shops, will give people money to open up bookstores, because he knows that if you keep the people thinking culturally, then they won't move politically. My position is that culture has to be political. Everything has to be political. And in terms of the struggle, that political direction will, give rise to the revolutionary struggle as a result of the repression that will be brought down because of political struggle. See, I think that it's significant to note that the laws that have been passed in this country for the past 10 years have been laws of a repressive nature to deal with black people. In other words, the Omnibus Crime Bill speaks directly to black people. So the Anti-Riot Bill tells black people when they can travel, how they can travel, and if they can travel. The McCarran Act of 1950, Internal Security, which came as a result of the Internal Security Act, created concentration camps in this country for black people. And so I think, in terms of the repression and in terms of the role of the vanguard groups, I think the role of the vanguard group is to bring that repression down before the timetable that has been set up by the system runs its full course. I think it's our responsibility to get the masses involved. And the way you get the masses involved is that you bring the repression down. When you begin to execute political programs, then out of necessity, the system has to do certain things to control or try to, put an end to the type of political action that you're executing. And by doing this, they involve the masses of people. The masses of people, from our position, from our viewpoint, is unorganizable. You can't hope to organize the masses of people. Oppression organizes the masses of people. White folks make more revolutionaries than I ever could make.
So they must be terrorists. And that's what the media portrays them. It's never the righteous, legitimate anger of the people against being occupied. It's always just some terrorists, some troublemakers, those who would benefit if Iraq was destabilized and fell apart. The people who, basically mercenaries, leading a bunch of tribals, who overthrew the government of Gaddafi, well, entirely on the NATO dollar and with the NATO bombings and whatnot. Those were legitimate acts of anger against an oppressive, evil tyrant. Many of those acts turned out actually to not be true. In fact, it was just an imperialist ploy the entire time to overthrow a legitimate government. But when they get angry at the fact that they've had their country overthrown from the outside by essentially foreign forces coming and doing it for them, and then they go and they kill the U.S. ambassador and the whole Benghazi Gate thing happens. It's troublemakers. It's just terrorists. Because again, we are the United States of America. We are the imperialist power, representatives of NATO to some degree. Nobody could not want us there. It must be a bunch of troublemakers. It must be a bunch of evil terrorists that don't want us there.
Fighting colonialism means that we need to ask ourselves hard questions about class privilege, responsibility, and self-reliance. In MLM theory, it is expected that people's war must be carried out in the Third World. I'm overjoyed to learn that there are MLM theorists which find that people's war needs to transition from peasantry to the shantytowns, or at least a combination of peasantry and shantytowns. In MLM theory, it is believed that it is time to move into the civil society in the First World. Move into civil society where citizens openly express militia building in the U.S. that is quite possible to an extent. As a Maoist Third Worldist, I am critical of the low possibility of this, although I do think it can be done to an extent. Militia building in Canada would require popular open defiance. This would not help the slogan of legal deterrence. In the United States, this would be more likely. MLM objects to seeking entryism into electoral systems. When you entertain the system, you don't change it, it changes you. MLM theory requires study of the laws of the land in first world countries. MLM theory never shies away from opposition to colonialism. Maoists accuse Third Worldists of neglecting the fight against colonialism in the name of fighting imperialism. Third Worldists accuse Maoists of forgetting that imperialism is the primary contradiction. Maoists would, of course, object to the idea that they neglect fighting imperialism, that they simply refuse to water down the importance of forgetting decolonialization. Likewise, Third Worldists object to the accusation that we watered down the importance of decolonialization.
Well, let's go back a bit. Let's backtrack. What happened with you and SNCC? Why did you leave?
Well, my term as chairman expired.
Yeah.
And, there was an election, and Brother Phil Hutchins was elected program secretary. There was a restructuring of the organization because what had happened was that the man had effectively directed his repressive laws against individuals. And when this had happened, it created a vacuum. When I was off the scene, people who respond to me would not respond to other individuals. So what we did, we created a decentralized type of decentralization occurred in whereby we created other people to be spokesmen. See, people have to get out of the idea that individuals lead movements. See, the revolutionary is the individual who's on the other side of that camera. These are the people who will make the revolution. They have responsibilities to the revolution and to themselves. And, if individuals articulate positions, it's perhaps because they have public forums, not because they know more than anybody else, not because they are more oppressed than anybody else. So black people have to begin to understand the role that they have to play in that revolution is determined by them.
What about the future for you, Rap? Where will you fit in as this revolutionary process evolves?
Good question. In terms of the legal cases that I have in court now, the man, is moving against me as an individual to put me away, and to get rid of me and get me off, out the streets. Now, I think, everything hinges and pins upon the nature of the struggle that's conducted in this country. If black people wage successful revolutionary struggle in this country, then every black cat in jail, he doesn't have to worry about being in prison because he's black. But, my fate as the fate of, every other black person in this country depends upon what we do.
You feel that that the law justice is truly blind, or you feel that it's
No, justice ain't blind. Justice see white folks mighty well. As a matter of fact, justice means just us white folks in this country. See, for black people, justice is a joke. No such thing as justice in this country for black people. The courts are a tool of oppression. The courts, help to execute the genocide, the type of genocide that has been practiced against black people in this country for 400 years.
Why is it that there's not much exposure about what you feel, if it is true that justice is not blind, that it does favor one segment of the society? Why isn't it attacked more by responsible agencies?
The very reason that they're responsible means that the very statement responsible agents say that they're not going to respond. Because, in terms of the status quo is never attacked by the comfortable people, the people who profit from it. And so as to expect, the responsible Negroes or the responsible white people, to attack this system from the basis that poor people and oppressed people will attack it, is out of the question.
You say that America as it stands just cannot be as far as the black man is concerned. Does this mean that the democratic idea, not how it's practiced, but the idea of a democracy is not valid?
I think that in terms of, there has been no successful example of democracy as it's taught in this country. I'm not even talking about as it's practiced. I'm talking about as it's taught in this country.
How about the Constitution?
Looks good on paper. I think, the Constitution has a lot of valid ideas and thoughts. But you see that the contradictions that exist in this country are created out of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And otherwise, Constitution is nothing but white people's paper. It's advantageous and it's favorable for white people. They created contradictions to the Constitution when they added the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment.
Rap, what effect is the end of the Vietnam War going to have on the situation here in this country?
I think that if, America has ever run out of Vietnam and defeated, as they should be in Vietnam, then black people over here will have to, be in a position where they can defend themselves. Because I think that aggression that's being directed against the Vietnamese people will be turned inwardly against black people in this country. See, America, in terms of where she goes and who she controls, a whole sphere of influence is diminishing. America is fighting on about 5 to 6 different fronts right now. Latin America, like Africa, Middle East, and Vietnam, and here domestically. So I think that, given the system and given that it operates off the military-industrial complex, which means that war is profitable and that, General Steel or USS Steel must make steel for tanks to hire people, to give people jobs so they can spend the money to buy other goods. The very fact that the system operates off that principle means that when the man comes back, when the man is run out of every country, then it will become necessary to wage war in his own country.
This is an utter contradiction to what a lot of politicians said, that when the war in Vietnam ends, then we can use all that money to sort of solve our racial ills here.
No, it's not true, you see, because money has never been a problem for this country in terms of allotting money, because, you see, money here is not based on gold. It's not really based on the goods that produce. See, this is a lie that's been told, and it's been sold to black people as green power. Green power is a myth, see, because as long as a man possesses the power to change the color of money, then, the color of money is not significant in struggle. He can give black people all the green money in the world and tell them they're using red money tomorrow. Black people have to go work for red money. In terms of what he did to the international monetary system. Now, the United States has a budget, annual budget of $800 billion. They had only $12 billion worth of gold. In terms of their foreign spending, it exceeded the quantity of gold that they had in this country. So France was putting pressure on the United States by demanding payment in gold from paper currency. So what the United States did was that the United States said, okay, we're going to change the rules. They put pressure on the international monetary system, and they changed the whole international monetary standards from gold to paper gold. And they did that because they have power. Not because the money they had was so good. They had power.
Thank you.
I give you Russell Means from the American Indian Movement.
But the previous generation to mine suffered the most at the hands of this genocidal program, where they were not permitted to speak our native language. It was against the law to practice our religion, to even dance or sing in Indian. Anything Indian was condemned and punishable. And then he developed a program of forcing us off the reservation. There's many ways of doing this, of course. Economic deprivation. Therefore, we were forced into the cities to look for jobs for existence. Then they introduced the relocation program, where they relocated Indian people from reservations to 7 different designated cities in the United States. After the first 5 years of my life, first 6 or 7, I then began growing up in the urban environment. And I have yet to meet an Indian in the urban environment that does not plan on eventually going home. Going home is to the concentration camp where we come from, which the white man in this country terms a reservation. It is indeed a concentration camp and a zoo rolled into one. But there is a very vast difference between reservation Indian people who have grown up and stayed on the reservation and those Indians that have gone off into the urban areas. The difference is on the reservation, where the traditional life, even though it had to go underground to maintain, to exist, and now it is beginning to surface. But there you have the benefit of your people out in the districts, out on the land. And you learn patience. You learn the value system of being a red man of the Western Hemisphere. You are in close touch with Mother Earth and all the traditional beliefs and all the traditional people, especially the old people who are so important to our existence as the red man of the Western Hemisphere. In the urban environment, to remain an Indian is like trying to swim upstream in rapids because of the totality, the comprehensive totality and weight that surrounds you in the cities, the white man's ways. You see, an old man told me once that the hardest thing today is to be an Indian. Now, he did not mean racial discrimination. He did not mean bias and prejudice. He did not mean the white man's hate for us. What he meant was living the life of a traditional Indian in today's world. Today's world, it's too easy to be white. To be a white man, all you have to be concerned about is money and possessions and the pleasures, what he terms pleasures of life, when he doesn't realize that here lies the pleasure, the life that surrounds us, these green things which are our relatives, this grass, the things that grow are our relatives. That is life. That's beauty. The clouds, the universe, the birds, the four-leggeds, all living things which are our relatives. But the white man sees that he has to manipulate and exploit all these things so that he can have pleasure, self-pleasure. It's complete selfishness. And so this is what that old man meant when the hardest thing today is to be an Indian, to get up with the morning star and pray at the time that the great mystery gave the two-legged the time to pray. You see, with the morning star, everything is quiet. All life has rested so that the two-legged can communicate with the great mystery. The birds are quiet. All life is asleep. Our Mother Earth is asleep. And so at this time in the morning is the time when we pray, as we have recognized that it is set aside for us at that point in time. The hardest thing to be an Indian is to go into the sweat lodge daily, to live the life of our ancestors. That's what he meant. Because it's so easy to be white. It's so easy to go out and get a job and become concerned only with money. And then you start building fences around your house. And you start building fences around your cities. You start building fences around your states. You start building fences around your country. And all this time you're building only a fence around yourself. And that's the fault of the white man. He is by himself. He lives by himself. He has no relatives. He even goes so far as to leave the land of his ancestors, to leave the burial places of his forefathers. He has no respect, so he is isolated. The difference between the urban Indian and the reservation Indian is that the temptation to be selfish, the totality of that temptation is too much to fight against. And consequently, to live in the urban areas, as I have done, is to lose your Indianness, slow but sure. So this is why I chose to return home to the reservation, even though it is a concentration camp. My beautiful people are there, my old people, my religious leaders, my relatives, all that are still free. And so that is really the difference between urban and reservation Indian.
That was a much younger Russell Means. I give you an older Russell Means. He speaks of a correspondence between his religion and Western science.
Ametakwepe. Mima lakota. Imajanta ha. Wakinzi tioshpa. Kile chesapa kin. Lilawakan. Makawakan. What I told you in my language, roughly translated, is part of what I'm bound to say when I speak to people, because I come from an oral society. And I said, hello, my relatives. I am an ally, and I come from Yellow Thunder Village in our very sacred Black Hills, our holy land. Mother Earth here is what really it's all about. The female-male balance in the universe. As you can see, the disrespect for everything that is sacred is what's wrong with this society. And nothing's ever going to happen until this society accepts the fact in their heart, not in the right side of their brain, as the so-called Western scientists have ascertained, the right brain thinking, the linear mathematical equation to life. But what is needed is the knowledge and the wisdom that the earth is a living being. Even the Bible, a male-dominated religion, tells you dust to dust, that we come from the earth. And yet, Christian theology is bereft of anything about the environment. And our sacred grandmother, the Mother Earth, is what it's all about. Once we understand and know and feel that she is alive. You know, Western science has ascertained that. In the early 80s, they sank a shaft in Greenland, of all places, a mile or so down into the earth, and brought up data for months and months. And with that data, they ascertained that the earth is a living organism in space. So now you've got your proof. You've got your proof. So please, start putting it in your heart. You got it up here. Now put it here. And she's alive. And she hurts. And she feels like you and I. With that kind of respect and knowledge, then this junk, all this junk, wouldn't happen. And you will understand the value, the spiritual value of a mountain that is the breasts. The mountains are the breasts of our Mother the Earth, and that's where we go for, to nurture our spirituality. Ask any religion on earth. Ask any scientist about the ions. And if you don't know what ions are, then go to your heart. I want to thank everyone for this play. I want to thank everyone for this honor. And I want to thank you for your attention. Oh, mitako yase. We are all related.
Because of course, when the emperor comes in, bombs a country, kills hundreds of thousands of people, or in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan combined, about 3 million people, the emperor burns down the villages. You know, or bombs an entire country to the ground. But if someone dare roadside bomb like a U.S. convoy, they light a candle, and that's going too far. What we see in Ferguson today with the liberal white outrage or conservative, but particularly with regards to liberals, because they don't support what it is that was done to Michael Brown. But somehow they just keep continuing to support the system that doesn't. That's the same thing that's going on in Ferguson right now, and the many other cities around the country that are protesting right now. The emperor is allowed to burn down the villages, kill scores of black people, arrest them constantly for virtually non-existent things, oppress the hell out of them, conduct random searches on them, with the stop and frisk thing. But if the people dare light a single candle, even by just protesting, they're not allowed. The United States government, whether that be the police or the imperialist power structure, or just the racist mentality of white America, they are the emperor. Even white people are getting mad because black people lit a single candle. Again, another thing that popped up with this whole situation with Darren Wilson and Michael Brown. The same kind of thing that popped up with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman is the idea of this superhuman, superpowered black man. Now this has its racist roots going back to college football and whatnot. The idea that because only really strong slaves were bred with each other, kind of form of eugenics, that's why they're such better athletes and stuff like that. And that justifies a lot of the racist perceptions. Look at it. Look how it's really looked at. He was beaten savagely by this Hulk kid. It looked like, it felt like I was a child in Hulk Hogan's hands or something like that. Both Michael Brown and Darren Wilson were about the same size. In fact, there was very little size difference between the two of them. Oh, well, one of them had a gun as well, but, what's that really matter? And of course, we can go into the whole thing how this savage beating was essentially actually nothing. Little more than a minor abrasion, which could have been easily confused for rosacea and prescribed over-the-counter Tylenol for. But this is always a constant theme. The Trayvon Martin was this, this savage that just attacked George Zimmerman out of nowhere for no reason, other than the fact that he was stalking him. That Trayvon Martin had these MMA type moves, and that's what allowed him to beat the much bigger Zimmerman. So even when the guy's bigger, like in the case of Zimmerman, it's still some kind of savage beast mentality, that there's some kind of roving evil threat. And it, of course, has its roots back at the end of slavery and whatnot. Oh, well, if we just end slavery, they're going to run around killing people and murdering all the former white masters, stuff like that. All of which never happened. And then made it out to be like this big, roving, evil pack of savages, and a lot of really colorful language used to describe that. And which, of course, never actually took place. But we see that as very alive still today. Those with the least amount of power in society, next to Native Americans, who can wield the least amount of control and power in society, are portrayed as the absolute biggest threat. Those on top, with the greatest power possible, with the highest offices in the country, actually, let me take that back, all the offices in the country, are the poor, innocent victims. It's these horrible, evil masses who have no power in society who are bad. Not the police officers who have basically the entire bureaucratic apparatus of the country protecting them. And we're going to go into that in another video. Not those people who wield power in society. Not those who actually exercise all the power that there is with the U.S. government. No. The real power, the real danger, comes from the regular, everyday oppressed people. It's never the people with power that are the threat or the cause of danger. It's always those with little power or none at all. Whether that be the people on the ground in Ferguson or that be the people on the ground in Iraq. What about cop killers and killer cops. This was another great point that was brought up. Look at what happens when a cop kills somebody. The greatest of protection. Nobody really does anything. And it's damned near impossible to get a conviction or even a grand jury decision on it. But yet, if somebody kills a cop, like, say, Chris Dorner, or any other number of the people who have just said, that was it, I'm not tolerating this anymore, I'm going to go out and I'm going to, they decided that they were going to go kill cops. When those people do it, these become massive manhunts, where no expense is spared in trying to track these guys down and bring them to quote-unquote justice. But look at all the scores of people who have been killed by the police who very, very rarely even get a second thought. But if somebody dares do that to the police, well, it's a national emergency. Now look how many people it took to track down Chris Dorner. It took an incredible amount of people. You think that would ever be used on someone who just killed somebody else? You think that would ever be used on a cop who just killed somebody? Of course not. And then have these white liberal types sit there and say, oh, don't loot, don't riot, because the system will take care of that. There's the whole bureaucratic legal process that will totally help you, which already isn't working to begin with, which is why we have riots. But that's another point that I wanted to make. A cop kills people, nothing, that's everyday work. But if somebody kills a cop, well, that's a massive manhunt. That's a nationwide emergency. That we must bring this guy to justice and we will spare no expense in doing so. A little bit of a double standard there, don't you think? And while we're on the subject of race, in Clayton, in about, I think it was July this year, a black police officer was charged because he hit a white MetroPass, the public transit, hit a white passenger with the baton. So you're telling me this guy hits, a black cop hits a white passenger, gets charged. This white cop kills a black kid. Nothing. Really. And that shows an absolute double standard and makes me really wonder, like looking at black cops, like how do you really justify being a cop when this is what they'll do to you? I mean, you clearly don't care what they'll actually do to black people in general. But look at what this one guy will, look what they'll do to you personally as a police officer. Yes, I know Clayton is not Ferguson, and this is by no means an isolated incident. But it is symptomatic of the prejudice that exists even within the police. And despite any statement made by Obama a couple days ago how the police aren't racist. Here's the double standard on race, even within police departments themselves. When things like this happen and the white liberals go out, that's the ones I particularly have a problem with because they're the ones that claim they care when they really don't. They always talk about a lack of tolerance that leads to this situation. The police need to be more tolerant of the black population. The protesters need to be more tolerant of the police, and this is all about a lack of tolerance and understanding. Never does it ever occur to them that there might be a systemic, long-standing issue, that this might be systematic. There might actually be something repressive about the system itself. It's always some kind of perceived injustice that just happens. Well, no police system is perfect, which is really nothing more than a justification for the things that it does. But it's beyond their comprehension that this could actually just be a problematic system, that this system creates these inequalities. It's never a question about inequality. It's never a question about what it is that the system does, like how it's set up, how it's structured, what it structurally does. It's always some kind of aberrant behavior to them. It's always some kind of, oh, this is just one bad apple. Because remember, it's always one bad apple. It's never the other way around when it's protesters. It's always just this bad apple. But no, when it's the masses, they're all evil, scary animals. Think about that. Now me, One thing I am sick to death of hearing is Cornel West talking in situations like this.
This is Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael.
Now these liberal congressmen got up the other day on television and they said to the North Vietnamese, now listen fellas, we have been for you all the time, but now if you we have been for you all the time, but if you mess with our racist fellas, we're going to have to take care of you. That's what he was saying. That's what Church was saying when he said, I am begging the North Vietnamese not to bother our pilots because you're going to ask us to bomb you. He ought to be talking to this racist country and telling them not to bomb Vietnam. That's what he ought to be talking. And you have to watch the way it operates inside this country. Because what they say to us is that we are for you, but don't forget you're 10% of the population. And if you get smart, we'll wipe you out. Now, if we talk about true equality, then we have to move to a position where we can define.
Thank you, my friend.
We have to tell our black brothers who are graduated from colleges that to be successful is not to get a job with IBM or Wall Street, but we have to define success for them, and we have to say that to be successful is to come back into your community and...
That was a much younger Kwame Ture. This is a much older Kwame Ture. Here he will explain the importance of religion historically. If you claim MLM, then you have to take this into your analysis.
We know that all peoples all over the world will be free. Know this. Because all people have an instinctive love of justice. This is clear and can be demonstrated everywhere. If one will get one's anthropologists and one's historians, one will see there is no society that man has found which has not produced religion, not one. Every society has religion, every society. And if one will look properly at these religions, while they vary widely, they have different forms and different rituals. Some have one as God, some have many as God, some take the fish and make their God, some, like the American Indians, understand that Mother Earth is their God. You will find while they differ, they have one essential thread running through all of them. All religions come to preach to the people that they must live a just life, that they must follow a just God, that they must treat every human being just like they themselves want to be treated. There is no religion that doesn't tell the people to act properly, to live justice, and to live with an upright heart. All of them say the same thing. Consequently, even though all these religions may vary, if you look through the thread of them, you will see the same thing. Of course, we must say, and it is a fact, that in all of these religions you will find bad people who say they are religious, but are indeed not religious, and are only trying to fool the people. Sometimes the preachers are leading the stock here. This is a fact. This is a fact. This is a fact. But this does not deny the truth of what we say. All religions come to preach justice, and consequently all people who say they adhere to religions must serve the cause of justice. Christianity for us as a people, especially in the West, is more important than Judaism. Not because Judaism is more important than Christianity, or Christianity more important than Judaism. No religion is more important than any other religion. At any time a Christian feels that his religion is better than Islam, or a Muslim feels that his religion is better than Judaism, these people have no understanding of religion at all. All religious people must respect the religions of all other people. Indeed, they must come to fight to protect the integrity of the religions. A Muslim, hearing Christianity slandered, has the responsibility to come and fight against the slandering of Christianity. A Christian, hearing someone speak ill of the Prophet Muhammad, must come and defend the Prophet Muhammad. As a matter of fact, all of us as intelligent human beings must know the Bible, must read the Torah, and must read the Holy Quran. Christians must know the Quran. Muslims must know the Bible. Even those of us who are atheists must know these books, because anytime these books can have this much influence among these many people for this length of time, they ought to be read and understood to by every human being who are going to interact with these people who believe in these books. Everyone who knows anything about Christianity in Africa knows of Africa's great contribution to Christianity. If one will just take a simple look at Christianity, one will know the first church in the world came out of Africa. One will know the first monastery in the world came out of Africa. One will know the very intellectual development of the church was a result of Africa. The councils held in Alexandria, in Egypt. Even St. Augustine himself ain't nothing but an African. We say anyone who knows anything about Christianity knows of Africa's great contribution to Christianity. If one would just flip through the Bible, in Genesis 2, verse 13, the very first country mentioned in the Bible is Ethiopia. According to the version of the Bible you have, this Ethiopia might be spelled Cush, C-U-S-H, or Cush, K-U-S-H. If you will go to an authoritative source, you will see that Cush, spelled either with a C or a K, is the ancient name for Ethiopia. We say Genesis 2, verse 13, in the very beginning of the Bible. If one would take just a cursory look at the Bible, one would know that Europe is not mentioned in the Bible until near the very end of the Bible. If one knows anything about the life of Jesus Christ, one would know that when Jesus Christ was in trouble, his mother took him to Egypt, and here he spent 10 years in Africa, growing physically, spiritually, and morally, and learning all the principles of Africa. If anyone knows anything about the history of Christianity, one knows that Christianity was not spread to Europe by Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, Jesus Christ never saw Europe. This is a fact. It's in the Bible. The disciples of Jesus Christ, Peter and all the others, they never saw Europe. The religion of Christianity was spread to Europe by the apostles who came long after the disciples. And let it be properly understood, it took 400 years after the death of Jesus Christ to consolidate Christianity in Europe after one of the bloodiest fights that mankind has ever seen. They didn't want it. But you can't stop the truth. When we understand these facts, we come to understand how vicious is our enemy. Go through the Caribbean, go through the United States of America, go through Britain, go through Africa, go into the homes of Africans who call themselves Christians, underline the word call, who call themselves Christians. You will find in their bedrooms, you will find in their bathrooms, you will find in their kitchens, you will find in their cars, you will find in their keychains a picture of a white Jesus with blonde hair and blue eyes. It is only European imperialism, which like Zionism seeks to use religion for unjust causes, that comes to take this Christianity and try to paint it white. How can this be? We're not here to argue the color of Jesus Christ. That's not our problem. We're here to give the truth. And it's a truthful statement when we say that Jesus Christ could be just about any color, but the one color he definitely could not be is white. For those of us who give European imperialism no slack, if you go and take a penetrating analysis, you will see this picture of this white Jesus whom we bow down before is nothing but the uncle of the artist who painted the picture. Africans who are Christians must be on the front line leading the battle against this lie of Christianity. Jesus Christ was not, could not be white. You must be careful. Do you know when you tell a Christian that Jesus Christ is not white, they will call you racist? Yes, I had one the other night said he's not white. What difference does it make? Well, if it makes no difference, why is he always painted Christianity. Africa is our home. Until Africa is free, no African anywhere in the world will ever be free. In order for Africa to be free, she must be liberated, unified, and socialist. This term socialism we must come to understand. Here, everywhere they're trying to bring confusion. As a matter of fact, some try to let us think that they know what socialism is, and they're the only ones who know what it is, and if you don't come through them, you'll never find it. Stupidity, lies. The truth belongs to every man and every woman who searches for it. The truth cannot be invented. Some try to confuse us and let us think that Karl Marx invented socialism. Nothing is further from the truth. Karl Marx could not invent socialism, it's a truth. The best that Karl Marx can discover it, and the best that we can say is from our historical readings, Karl Marx is the first man we know to have studied and written about socialism. We call the laws of gravity Newton's laws. But we would be stupid if we think that Newton invented that a body in motion tends to stay in motion unless stopped by an outside force. Newton cannot invent this. This little child here knows this. When she runs, the wall stops her. She doesn't run anymore. She knows a body in motion tends to stay in motion unless stopped by an outside force. Any man, any woman who has never heard of Newton, sitting in Timbuktu, studying the laws of gravity, will come to the exact same conclusions which Newton came to, that a body in motion tends to stay in motion unless stopped by an outside force, and that a falling body falls at the rate of 32 feet per second squared per second squared. This is a fact. Any man, any woman who's never heard of Karl Marx, any man, any woman who's never heard of Frederick Engels, any man, any woman who's never heard of the great V.I. Lenin, studying the laws of society, studying the means of production, the mode of production, studying the laws that govern it, the laws that govern the society, will come to the exact same conclusions that Karl Marx, V.I. Lenin, and Frederick Engels came to. Socialism is a truth. It doesn't belong to any one man. It belongs to all men and all women. There are but two economic systems in the world, capitalism and socialism. There are only two. Some people will tell us that there are another one, but they haven't found it yet. Until they do, we must deal with the reality. There exists capitalism and socialism. All Africans must be suspicious of capitalism for what it has done to us and continues to do to us. Only the people properly organized will free the people. Only the people properly organized will free the people. Consequently, every African who knows they have a responsibility to humanity must be involved in an organization fighting for our people. Let it be clear, let it be properly understood. If your mother is being raped and you are not doing anything to help protect your mother, you are against your mother. Let it be clear, let it be properly understood. If your people are being exploited and you are not doing anything to stop the exploitation of your people, you are against your people. Let it be properly understood. A man is not known by the words he utters, but by the deeds he commits. If a man says he loves his family and he demonstrates no concern for his family, working for them or trying to protect them, he's a liar and the truth is not in him. If a woman says she loves her people and she doesn't work for her people, be concerned about her people, and try to protect her people, she's a liar and the truth is not in her. You find it all the time. My brother, what you doing for your people? I love my people. My brother, what organization you belong to? I love my people. My brother, when last you been on a demonstration with? I love my people. Oh, when you love something, you must demonstrate it in concrete action. If you love your people, if you really love your people, you must be working for them every minute of the day. And the only way you can do it is in an organization. What's the message? Brothers, sisters, join an organization. They will tell you organization is no good. I will tell you the truth. Bad organization is better than no organization at all. see that there are not many organizations here which really tell the truth, which can solve the problem, then you have the responsibility of creating the organization that will solve the problem. Every one of us who care about our people must belong to an organization. Brothers, sisters, comrades, come now. The task before us is the organizing of our people, scattered all over the world, organizing them and channeling in their energies to one objective. This is our task. It will only be accomplished through joining organizations. Thank you. Ready for the revolution.
I want to make it clear that Glassno 44 is not the Marxist Satanist that happens to be black. Now, I'm not sure if this guy is really Marxist, Satanist, or black. I do not even know if this guy considers me a friend or a foe. They made a 3-part series using me as a symbol for white leftism, even though it is the so-called intersectional Maoist who actually embodies white leftism. The reason why I find this YouTuber suspicious is because he gives his solidarity to the actual living embodiment of white leftism. I think the video that he did, this on the comment section called Correcting Our Line, I think. This Satanist claiming to be dead gives approval to this champion of white leftism. But I am at least grateful that in the first video by the Satanist, he says that he does not want me canceled. His criticisms of me had merit. What he had no idea of was that I had been working towards expressing my views on combating colonialism for some time now. Then gaining awareness in this 3-part series was made, I realized that I put off the project far too long. From last year to this year, I had gained the necessary language to express my anti-colonial position in a dialectical way. I want to say something. My debate with Richard Spencer was absolute cringe. I was bombarded with kindness. I was not told that jokes like Eric Stryker even existed. I actually thought that the debate was going to be over IQ and race. I should have met with the Bundes sooner. I should have met with comrade number 3 of the Navajo Nation sooner. In that debate I said these fascists treated me kinder than leftists did. I had already debunked some of the statements they made before I could answer the encirclement that fascists interrupted. This happened throughout the debate of ultra cringe that I so awfully failed. I was guilty of liberalism throughout the entire debate. Again, I wish certain people had come to me sooner. But with this, I hope it is now understood where I actually stand. I oppose white leftism. I oppose whiteness. I stand for pan-Europeanism, even though a plan for the most of us settlers to return to Europe. Those of us found worthy to stay in the lands of North America, Australia, and New Zealand must recognize indigenous sovereignty, not settler occupation. This is where I stand.
Now, you know who Cornel West is. Black academic. He's been arrested, what have you. This guy championed his ass off for Obama. I mean, he did everything he could to try to get this guy elected. And now he goes out saying that Obama has abandoned the black population. That he doesn't care about black people. Of course he doesn't. But how can a man so smart not get it through his head? He really believes that it's just race. That the cops are just racist. You know, the former presidents, they were just racist. It's never something systemic within the system itself. And then when a black president got elected, because he thought, well, if a black man gets elected president, you know, this kind of stuff is going to stop. Because he won't tolerate it because he's black. And then it continues. And in fact, a lot of statistics show that African Americans are even worse off under Obama than they were during Bush. And yet he stands here saying like how, oh, this Obama's abandoned us. And he was never on your side. To even think that he was ever on your side demonstrates that Cornel West does not understand the structure of society. Because if you think you can just change the head and then the whole system will change, you clearly don't understand what the system is and clearly do not understand how it works. Another thing that gets overlooked is the whole class aspect to this. People don't understand the class reality of the police. The police are there to serve and protect the capitalist class, the property-owning class, those who own the means of production. But they present it in a particular narrative which allows them to continue doing that. For example, whenever things happen like this, a lot of white people, conservative or liberal or ironically enough, libertarian, run out and they say how the police are just doing their jobs, or this is why we need police because of things like this. And, you know, we're glad the police are here to take care of problems like this. Because you notice it's always like the thing where in their reasoning it's protecting them from black masses. That's always the racial connotation that's put with it, even by liberals. But they never realize the actual class structure of the police themselves. They're there to repress you too. It's one of those situations where white people are less attacked by the police, a lot less attacked by the police than African Americans. So therefore, by that reasoning, the police are there to protect white people. And thus, from that, they get the support from white people, who all have their own complaints about the police. But those complaints just suddenly disappear when you get an uprising like this, or you get a riot like this, or whatever particular word you'd like would like to use for it. That particular class aspect of the police suddenly gets forgotten. And people who are not class conscious do the same thing. You know, I hate the police because I have to pay a parking ticket, or I had to speed. What the F? All of a sudden, that all gets forgotten when there's an uprising like this. When black people get mad and they riot, all of a sudden they're glad the cops are there. And all of a sudden they're on the cops' side. Here's another good one. Take the example of the Bundy Ranch thing. Here were white people with guns threatening to kill the cops, directly intending to overthrow the government. They even called for that to happen. They literally called for a revolution to happen. Nothing happened to these people. Were any of them shot dead? Ones who were actually taking guns and aiming them right at the friggin' cops, threatening them, yelling threats. Any of them get shot? No. But somehow some black kid running away, who has his hands up, unarmed, gets killed. Somebody like to explain that one to me? Well, yeah, because he's black. But the media jumps on all this too. They're just patriots who are concerned for their country. Well, actually, it was a millionaire who just didn't want to pay his taxes. But look at this in the eyes of these white people, both liberal and conservative. This guy is outraged that he had to pay taxes for land that he didn't own. Meaning he was using that and not having to pay. And then he owes all these back taxes. And that's too far. We need to have a revolution in this country, and we need to come from all over to protect this guy from having to pay his taxes. But if there's a systemic killing of black people, then their anger is not justified. Then they're just thugs and looters looking for an excuse to trash the place. Because, of course, nobody could actually really care, right? I mean, I love listening to white people, particularly liberal white people, and even conservative white people too, complain about the looting. They're stealing. Says the people who live in a country that was literally stolen by other people and built up by the slave labor of other people. Honest to God, who are you even kidding with that? And again, I could go into a whole thing about property ownership and private property about this. I mean, Bundy Ranch guy's arguing over what he owns, or what he has to pay money on, what he does or doesn't owe, depending on the situation. And the people of Ferguson are getting killed in their own city. And the totally different treatment. Do the police come in and start killing people when there's a riot of white people really excited because a sports team won? Nowhere. There's no comparison between that and the police response in Ferguson. Absolutely none. Militarized police, yes. Same response? Absolutely not. And in this situation, when leftists or so-called communists are whining about there being riots and whining about there being looting, I say to you the same thing that Mao said when the peasants were doing the same thing. It's fine. The present upsurge of the peasant movement is a colossal event. In a very short time, in China's central, southern, and northern provinces, several 100 million peasants will rise like a mighty storm, like a hurricane, a force so swift and violent that no power, however great, will be able to hold it back. They will smash all the trammels that bind them and rush forward along the road to liberation. They will sweep all the imperialists, warlords, corrupt officials, local tyrants, and evil gentry into their graves. Countless thousands of the enslaved, the peasants, are striking down the enemies who have battened on their flesh. What the peasants are doing is absolutely right. What they are doing is fine. It's fine. It's the theory of the peasants and all of other revolutionaries.
Bordering Mexico and Arizona is the Tohono O'odham land, and the super colonialist president wants his wall. He does not care that this will destroy the way of life for an entire indigenous nation. Think about the parallels here. The Bundist movement have the slogan, the Jewish nation is not based on race. The Jewish nation is not based on ethnicity. The Jewish nation is based on culture and religion. The Mexica movement has the slogan, we are not Latino, we are not Hispanic, we are indigenous. Then we have the Palestinian nation, which the Bundist movement happened to be the ancient indigenous Israelites. There's a false assumption made based on the Puritan fictions of the Jewish race, having much of its origins in the Spanish Inquisition. The expulsion of Jews and Muslims from Islamic Spain that led to the expansionist colonial settler movement into what the West calls the Americas of the New World. The only actually existing New World Order is Americanism. Americanism must support Zionism by default of its own flawed logic. Now hold on. It gets worse. Much worse. If you understand Christian history, then you know that the Christian language is Greek. Not every Greek is a Christian, and not every Christian is Greek. The Muslim language is Arabic, yet not every Arab is Muslim. Not every Muslim is Arab. So why is it assumed that every Jew is from the 12 tribes of Israel? Most tribal Israelites have converted to Christianity or Islam. Most of the Jews are the descendants of other ethnic groups. The ethnic Israelites may have been the first of what we know today as Jewish. But the Jewish nation is based on a very old religious code of cultural covenants, Jewishness or Torah culture, Judaism or religious code of books, a nation based on seeking a better world. Is there any wonder so many of them are socialists? Is it any wonder that Jews well versed in their own Torah culture reject the state of Israel? Not every Palestinian is Jewish. Most Jews are not Palestinian. And do be confused, the Palestinians are the same people as the tribal Israelites. There is the first world, which exploits the third world, the second world of developing and declining countries. Then there is the fourth world. The fourth world is the native North Americans, which are called First Nations here in Canada. The fourth world is also the Australian Aboriginal Indigenous nation. The Indigenous of New Zealand is also the fourth world. And given the scarring by Spanish colonialist powers over the lands we call Mexico, these Central Native Americans, Indigenous Mexicans, are also the fourth world. But do you realize who else is the fourth world? The Palestinians are the fourth world, a colonial settler occupation calling itself Israel. Even though the very word Israel refers to all Jews in the world, the term Israeli, is only a word that could only have a correct context for Hebraic Israelites, making the Samaritans the genuine Israelis. The Zionist state that calls itself Israel is cultural genocide upon the Palestinian nation and the Jewish nation. There are also the worldless nations, or more respectively, the diaspora nations. These include not just the Jewish nation, but the Romani nation, often called Gypsies. It is the duty of communists to destroy colonialism, fascism, and imperialism. We must combat Holocaust denial. To not do so is to spit in the face of Comrade Joseph Stalin. The British and Americans dismissed us communists when we told the Americans and Brits about the death camps. Then they saw the death camps. There's so many stories from the Russian Red Army fighters and how angry the sight of the entire thing was to see. This is where we are today. How long until the concentration camps become death camps? The Nazis held people in concentration camps and they sent many souls to death camps. The German people knew. This is dehumanization and it must be fought. The Nazi program of extermination is known to be inspired by the way Native Americans were eliminated. This ends with us. It must end with us. The Murder of Fred Hampton is a 1971 documentary film about the short life and death of Fred Hampton, the greatest Black Panther that ever lived. I'm leaving you with the closing of that documentary. Then I want you to do whatever it takes to find that documentary film and watch it for yourself. Dare to struggle. Dare to win. So then let me say peace to you, comrades, if you are willing to fight for it.
I want you to know that I want you to say, if you ever think about me, and if you think about me, niggas, and if you ain't gonna do no revolutionary act, forget about me. I don't want myself on your mind if you're not gonna work for the people. Like we always said, if you actually make a commitment at the age of 20, and you say, I don't want to make that commitment only because of the simple reason that I'm too young to die, I want to live a little bit longer. What you did, you did already. You have to understand that people have to pay the price for peace. If you dare to struggle, you dare to win. If you dare not to struggle, then goddamn it, you don't deserve to win. Let me say peace to you if you're willing to fight for it. Let me say it in the spirit of liberation. I've been gone for a little while. At least my body's been gone. You ain't got to repeat after me. At least my body's been gone for a little while. But I'm back now, and I believe that I'm back to stay. I believe that I'm going to do my job, and I believe that I was born not to die in a car wreck. I don't believe I'm going to die in a car wreck. I don't believe I'm going to die from slipping on a piece of ice. I don't believe I'm going to die because I got a bad heart. I don't believe I'm going to die because of lung cancer. I believe that I'm going to be able to die what I was in the things that I was born for. I believe that I'm going to be able to die high off the people. I believe that I will be able to die as a revolutionary in the international revolutionary proletarian struggle. And I hope that each one of you will be able to die in the international proletarian revolutionary struggle, even be able to live in it. And I think that struggle is going to come. Why don't you live for the people? Why don't you struggle for the people? Why don't you die for the people?